You're about to hear an original HFY sci-fi tale titled The War of Silent Stars. Find a quiet spot, put on your headphones, and let the stars fall silent. If you enjoy cinematic sci-fi narrations, consider subscribing for more. Now we begin. The nebula over Cullen looked like spilled milk and bruised violets, a cathedral of cold gas that swallowed signals and softened light until warships were the same dim ghosts as saints. And through that hush drifted the TMC Mercy Dawn, a medical shuttle painted white, its hull stenciled with the open human hand encircled by 12 stars, the sign you did not shoot. The sign that ended wars. Dr. Elise Wren stood in the shuttle's medbay and listened to the heartbeat of the ship, pumps, filters. A soft chime as the autoclave finished a cycle. Her hands were wrapped around a thermos. Coffee gone cold. She wasn't thinking of anything in particular. Maybe the way Vraxis Roman 4 dust always left a rust smell on the skin, or the way patients' eyes looked when the painkillers finally caught up and gave them back their breath. Beyond the bulkhead, the nebula rolled like weather silver blue, the kind of light that made camera sensors weep. 10 minutes to the Vraxis corridor, said Hale, the pilot, over the intercom. Ion drifts are low, smooth sailing dock. You just cursed us, Elise replied without heat. Hale said in a tone of ritual humor older than any one crew. Knocking on wood, all saints of vacuum guide us. Saints of vacuum, the medtechs echoed, smiling. This was how you survived the empty dark, with jokes that sounded like prayers and prayers that sounded like jokes. The Mercy Dawn slid into the corridor like a fish finding current. Elise glanced at the holo over the triage couch. Colony vitals, casualty estimates, the long list of routine tasks that saved lives. Saline, antivirals, burn gel, bone knitters, and a box marked for the children that held nothing but books and crayons, and a puppet shaped like a green seven-legged goat with a face so silly that even Dravar kids laughed. The puppet had a name. Hale had called it Go-Go. It rode strapped to the cabinet door and bounced when they hit a micro-eddy. It was so quiet she could hear the hiss of her own breath. The first impact came like a cough. Not a crash. Not a scream, a cough in the metal, something the size of a grain of rice traveling very fast, kissing the skin of their ship and moving on. What was that? Said someone too loud. Micrometeoroid, Hale answered. Hull integrity green, relax, we're fine. The second impact came with light. Elise didn't remember falling. She remembered light so white it had edges. She remembered the smell of copper and burned plastic. She remembered Hale's voice cut in half in the autopilot wailing in a tone of animal grief. She remembered, absurdly, reaching to steady Go-Go as the cabinet tore away and tumbled through the air. Then silence. Then cold. When she opened her eyes, the med bay was gone. No, not gone, simply open to the nebula, a mouth with its teeth blown out. She was inside a snow globe of glittering debris, medkit vials, a broken defibrillator, 2 of her techs, still and drifting. Her suit had sealed around her, a second skin deforming around blood-slick ribs. Her faceplate flickered with warnings. The hole through their hull was cleaner than a tear. It was the signature of a weapon designed to punch and not explode, avoid collateral, leave proof only to eyes that knew what to see. The kind of weapon you put on a patrol craft to keep order without making wreckage. Her throat tried to close. Through the shattered frame she saw silhouettes sliding like knives. A formation of small ships, sleek, with rakish angles, their skins marked with a sigil of interlocking scales that had terrified children 5 centuries ago. No pirate flew in formation that tight, with doctrine in the geometry of their flight. No scrap captain painted those precise glyphs. Dravar. Her suit's fingers found the distress beacon. It pulsed weakly. Her voice, when it came, sounded younger than she was. This is Dr. Elise Wren, Terran Medical Corps, ID 754 Alpha. The Mercy Dawn was fired upon in the Cullen Nebula. We are down. Weapon signature consistent with Dravar Dominion Interceptor class. Recording and transmitting. Please, please, any vessel. A piece of something bumped her shoulder. She turned. It was Gogo, the seven-legged goat, unstrapped and drifting, its button eyes ridiculous and gentle. She reached out. She caught it. The nebula was silent as stained glass. The Mercy Dawn rotated, and as it turned, she saw the slim line of a scavenger skiff slip between the Dravar formation and the wreck. Bold as a pickpocket, smooth as a thief in church. "Hold," said a voice in her ear, not from her ship, not from anything she had ever signed. "Don't die on me yet, Doc. I don't like debts I can't collect." The skiff's shell opened like the petals of a metal flower. A net of smart foam reached out. Her suit shuddered as it took hold and reeled her in. As the skiff closed around her and the nebula turned back to paint, the darkness folded its hands. Elise dreamed she was walking through a hospital where the walls were made of trees and the leaves whispered triage codes. She dreamed of a child on Vraxis Roman 4 with dust in his lungs and the color of old tea on his skin, and a smile like he was letting you in on a secret. She dreamed of a white hall with 12 banners, and a room full of aliens and humans standing around a table, everyone holding their breath, 500 years of it. She woke to the smell of oil and the sound of an engine with a bad bearing. The man leaning over her was a patchwork of scars and aftermarket brilliance. A cybernetic lens drifted over his right eye like a drop of quicksilver. He had a tattoo on his neck of a crescent moon biting its tail. He grinned with one side of his mouth. "Welcome back," he said. "You make a lot of noise for someone who's supposed to be dead." Elise tried to sit up and regretted knowing what a rib was. The skiff's cargo bay was a shrine to survival. Netting, crates, a patchwork gravity plate, a drone with a missing panel trying so hard to look competent she almost laughed. Her suit was half unsealed and cradling her in a sling. "How long?" she managed. 3 days, he said. "Your beacon lit up my sweeps. Funny thing, though, everyone came to look. No one came to take you." "Name?" she asked. "Call me Rook," he said. "It's not my name, but it's what I answer to." "Elise," she said. "Yeah," he said softly. He tapped the cracked datapad attached to the bulkhead. Every news feed in known space, her face, her ship, white letters that felt like bones. Human medic shot in nebula. Dravar deny attack. The Accord fractures. Are humans still humans? "The universe has opinions," Rook said. "You need water." She drank. It tasted like tin and mercy. "Why did you pull me out?" she asked, not ungrateful but curious in the way of someone who had seen too many desperate variables to leave one unmeasured. "Because a medic saved my sister on Ceres Station when a bulkhead failed," he said, almost casually. "Because I like the story where the one person who still believes doesn't die in a place nobody can see. Because if I didn't and you ended, then I wouldn't be the kind of man I keep telling myself I am." "Do you believe in the Accord, Rook?" she asked. "I believe in debts," he said, "and in not making new ones I can't pay." He smiled again, and behind the smile she saw a grief aligned like planets, private and inexorable. Outside the skiff, sirens no one could hear were wailing. Systems shut down. Borders froze. On Terra, the High Council reconvened under the old banners that had not seen daylight in 5 centuries. In their light, the oldest part of humanity stretched, remembered how to lace boots. Admiral Jace Corvin paced a war room that had been designed by someone who loved both aesthetics and paranoia. It had no windows, it had 3 secure lines. It had a wall screen showing space like a calm sea whose depths were full of ancient teeth. The hologram on the table was a replay of the Mercy Dawn dying. He watched it again. And again. He told himself repetition made a pattern. In truth, it made certainty, which was more dangerous. He stood tall but carried his height like it had weight. His hair was colorless in the way steel is colorless. When he spoke to the room, his voice made junior officers stand straighter without knowing why. "I want her found," he said. "Not the ship, the medic. If she's alive, she is proof. If she's dead, she is prophecy. Either way, we do not let the galaxy write this story for us." "Sir," said a commander with an accent like old earth rain, "the Dravar Senate denies the strike." "Of course they do," Corvan said. "Find me the ship, find me the gun, and find whoever wants us to remember what we were built for." He turned the hologram off. The room felt larger, he felt older. In a quiet voice, he said to no one visible, "Please God, let this be fixable." "God doesn't sit on this council," murmured his adjutant. "But you do." On Dravar Prime, Commander Vartal stepped into the hollow of a temple carved from obsidian and light. He dipped his claw in water poured from a cistern older than human rioting. The water ran over scales that were marked along the edge where a rail slug had scored ridges 20 years ago. He had been a young warrior then, too sure of the way the universe clicked together. The blood wars had been stories then, not warnings. He had built a career on believing the Accord was a leash that kept other species tame. He had scoffed when diplomats cited old lines. He had said among friends that humans were wolves in the clothing of shepherds. And yet, he watched footage of a white ship, a healer's ship, and a weapon with his people's signature split it like fruit. He watched a human's body drift among friends. He listened to the roar rising in the domes of his cities, the thrum of pride offended, of fear sharpening into blame. His chest was an echo hall full of drums. In a closed chamber his own son said, "Father, if humans wish to be the thing they were, we should be the thing we are." "And what is that?" Vartal asked. The boy had his mother's eyes, brilliant, scissoring slit pupils old as night. "Not pray," his son said. Vartal closed his eyes. He remembered a medic who had held the hand of his brother after a reactor leak on the border. The medic's gloves had been spattered with Dravar blood, his voice steady, calling for more fluid, for a stretcher, for a prayer. "You're safe," the medic had said to a brother whose language he did not speak. He opened his eyes. "We will be the thing that survives," Vartal said, which was what a commander was allowed to say when his soul was making a different argument he could not yet bear to put into air. Rook's skiff threaded dark lanes where official sensor nets didn't look. Elise slept, woke, healed, argued with pain, took apart the drone and fixed it so it could hum in a tenor rather than a wheeze. Rook watched over her like a wolf with a conscience, scowling at the calm feeds, then turning them off like he could turn off the world. "Everybody wants you," he said. "The council wants to preserve you as evidence. The radicals want a martyr. The Dravar hardliners want a ghost. We're going to slip you to someone who isn't any of those things." "Who?" she asked. "People who cut through locks because the building's on fire," he said. "I used to drink with some of them, back when I still tried to win arguments." He brought her to a station hung between two brown dwarfs like a paper lantern hung between dying candles. It was called the Spindle. It had been a mining outpost, then a black market, then a research lab in disrepute, then a place where ships the governments didn't want to acknowledge came to refuel out of embarrassment. Rook had friends in ugly places. They had names like Knots, Wrench, Mother of Wasps. They called Elise Doc because some words are older than politics. A woman in a rust-colored coat met them in a corridor that had plugged leaks with murals. She had a nose that had been broken and badly set. She had a ring in her ear made of recycled control rods. "Admiral Corvin sent a whisper," she said without preamble. "Ask those of us who remember the bad days to keep you intact." "Does he trust you?" Elise asked. "No," the woman said. "That's why he asked us." They took Elise to a room with a table scarred by real knives. They set a steaming bowl of something spicy in front of her, and it made her cry in the way grief does when it finds a scent it loved before it knew what it was losing. "We'll get you to Elysium Prime," the woman said. "We'll put you in the room with the only man who can keep a lid on a boiling galaxy. You are a symbol now, Doctor. I'm sorry. Symbols are meat hooks. They hold weight until they tear." "I'm not a symbol," Elise said softly. "I'm a medic." "Be both," the woman said, "for a minute. Then you can go back to saving idiots." "Why help me?" Elise asked again because her brain needed to keep touching this question like a sore tooth. Because I was a child on Thessaly when the last plague hit, the woman said, mouth barely moving. A Terran medic put me in a tent and burned my clothes and told me I was safe. Years later, when the warlords came and took this station, a human with 12 stars on her sleeve walked into the middle of the guns and said, "We do not shoot healers." And nobody did. Alliance or pirates or ghosts, nobody did. I want that to still be the rule that makes us worth feeding. They left that night. Rook did not go with them. He stood in the airlock and put his hand on the frame like he was touching a thing alive. "You still owe me," he said. "For what?" said Elise. "For not dying," he said, grinning. "Don't stiff me." "I'll pay in soup," she said, and he laughed like it surprised him. He watched her ship go. He put his hand in his coat and touched the folded picture of a girl with a gap between her teeth whose hair was braided like a sleeping river. He said nothing. He went back to his skiff. He put his name into a list of people who sometimes went where good men wouldn't. The rumors went ahead of Elise like wind on a field. On Terra Nova, a crowd burned a Dravar embassy while peacekeepers drew thin lines and then thinner. On Vesta Beacon, a group called the Silent Guard hijacked a convoy of missile parts and declared their intent to defend humankind outside the law that had failed to defend Elise inside it. On a moon called Shiaroman II, Dravar marchers pounded their chests in a rhythm that meant remember, and the walls answered with an echo called revenge. Admiral Corvan stood before the council and used a voice that had weathered flares and idiots and called them both by their proper names. "You will not sanction attacks," he said. "You will open channels. You will put ambassadors on the first ships and you will tell them to sit down and learn every word for sorry in the language of the people who think they killed us by accident." By accident, howled someone too young to be this certain. "They targeted our medics." "Someone did," Corvan said evenly. "Either the Dravar government ordered it and we are at war with an empire, or the Dravar government did not order it and we are at war with something worse." "What is worse than an empire?" said a minister whose suit cost more than a medbay. "A fractured narrative," Corvan said. "A galaxy full of people who believe two different true stories and act accordingly. Isn't that always the way?" the minister murmured. "Then our work is older than we are." Corvan said, "Do it." He turned and found his adjutant in the shadow of the doorway. "Where is she?" "En route," the adjutant said. "The spindle sent her in a smuggler's spine. Eat 6 hours." Corvan closed his eyes for less than a heartbeat. When he opened them, he was statued again. "Clear the lanes," he said, "and send a message to Commander Vartal." "What message?" the adjutant asked, already writing a message that could get them both fired. "Ask him if he remembers the name of the medic who saved his brother." On the other side of 1,000 light years, Vartal blinked at a message with a human seal and felt like the floor had raised. He did remember. He remembered the medic's voice saying a word in Dravar, badly pronounced, but the word had been right. "Stay." He looked down at his claws and saw the brackish echo of old blood. He sent no reply, but the station logs caught a lateral call to a secure channel. They caught the words investigation, unsanctioned, armory, rogue. They caught a commander becoming something harder to name. In the Elysium Prime approach lane, a mercenary wing decided to escort Elise's ship without asking. They were ex-Navy, mining guild, freight dogs who liked to fly in knife geometry because their bodies remembered. They painted the open hand on their hulls in defiance and devotion. The council called them criminals. The news called them heroes. It was a bad time to care what words meant. 3 hours from Elysium, the world tilted. A Dravar patrol wing dropped in from slip and took up a mirror formation to the humans. It could have been a dance. It could have been a firing squad. Comms lit with old lines and new threats. Then on Channel 12, a voice said in Dravar, "We are not here to kill. We are here to watch you choose." "Who are you?" asked the human wing leader. The Dravar did not answer with a formal name. They gave the name of a song instead. Some phrases do not translate. The meaning was something like we who stand between brothers before they claw each other's eyes out. The wings flew like a ceremony down the throat of Elysium's gravity well. Citizen eyes looked up and saw predator silhouettes side by side. Old panic rose in throats with muscle memory. Elise walked into Admiral Corvin's office alone because that was what the story required, and because it was also what she chose. He looked older than he had yesterday. He looked like a plan held together by wire. He looked at her and his shoulders forgot how to be a wall and remembered how to be a home. "Dr. Wren," he said. "Admiral," she said. "Thank you for not dying," he said, and his mouth startled itself into a near smile. "Thank Rook," she said. Corvin nodded. "We will," he said, and a small light in Elise's head eased because this was a man who kept the names of ghosts. They watched the footage together. Not of the attack, Elise had memorized that frame until memory bruised. They watched the analysis. Weapon signatures, trajectory probabilities, command structure maps. The places where the story the Dominion told did not line up with the story the Dominion needed to be true. "You're thinking rogue cell," Elise said. "I'm thinking worse," Corvin said. "Someone who wants the war more than they want a flag." He tapped a code. The wall showed images. A scrap of a hull, a tag in a dead drop, Rook's network, a courier burned on a moon called Finch's Fall, a cathode map of accumulators purchased through shell companies with names that tasted of grease. It was a puzzle with too few corner pieces. Corvin leaned forward as if leaning could pull the missing geometry into existence. "I sent a message to Vartal," he said quietly, "and," she asked. He did not answer, Corvin said, but he moved. In the days that followed, movement looked like drift. There were small raids in the Decca Fringe. Dravar border patrols arrested human miners and then released them with formal apologies and the humiliating gift of cheese. The Silent Guard attacked a supply depot and planted an orchard of flags on the slag with the colors of every human nation no longer existing. A human embassy somewhere far out bought 1,000 white flags made of silk and hung them in its lobby until the air smelled of a funeral that wouldn't decide who it was burying. Elise did not sit still. She was done being a symbol pinned to a board. She took a shuttle down to the south continent of Elysium Prime, where refugees slept in grids. She wrapped children in heat blankets and held hands slick with machine lubricant, and called the names of medicine and watched men's faces unfist when pain receded. She did this for humans, for aliens, for anyone who walked into her tent without a weapon raised. She did this and made sure the cameras didn't follow her good. She did this because at the end of any day, if this had not been how she had spent some of it, sleep would not come. She was stitching up a Dravar's arm when he hissed, a sound like a kettle angry at heat. "You should not touch me," he said in accented standard. "You should not waste supplies." "I am very efficient," she said, and the corner of his mouth warmed. Dravar did not smile the way humans did. They had a tilt to their heads that meant the same thing. He tilted. "Why?" he asked. "Because if we stop now," she said, "we won't remember how to start again." He watched her. "Your name?" "Elise," she said. "My son was patched by a Terran medic," he said. "Spoke our language like someone who learned it because it was a friend's." "Good medics are greedy," she said. "We collect words like we collect bone knitters." He nodded, "and bad medics become administrators," she said, and he laughed despite the thread in his flesh. The ground shook not from attack, from a ship rising. Elise looked up, light on her face. Corvin's flagship, the Sol's Edge, left orbit with a retinue like a cloak. Somewhere in the velvet between stars the Dravar would be making a gesture. Somewhere a gun would remember it liked its work. War found a stage above the Vraxis defense ring. The ring was a lace of platforms and nets around a planet that glittered green and blue beneath a band of aurora like a bruise healing. Vraxis Prime had been refined by 500 years of peace into something almost gentle. Its defenders had grown bored and then soft, which in warriors can be a kind of courage too. The Silent Guard arrived first. They were a dozen ships that flew like fists and sang like knives. They did not ask the council for permission to bleed. They painted the open hand on their hulls and loaded their bays with the kind of ordnance that proved religion and hypocrisy can be the same color. Admiral Corvan swore in a very old language. He burned drive to put the Saal's edge between the guard and the ring. He opened every channel. He said, "Stand down," so many times the words frayed. The Dravar answered with their own geometry. A wall of ships slid into lanes like chess pieces with glide. Commander Vartal was there. He sat at a console with his hands folded because sometimes stillness made a better weapon than motion. 100 guns found each other. 100 crews held breath. "Do not fire," Corvan said. "Do not fire," Vartal said under his breath to himself, like he needed the order to come from a mouth he trusted. Nobody knows whose hand slipped. It might have been no one's hand. It might have been a program written by a ghost. What the records show is a single missile burned its hairline bright through vacuum and found a human freighter whose hull was mostly hope and held breath. The freighter lit like a candle. The galaxy inhaled. Then it exhaled fire. The battle in the ring was surgical and barbaric. Human interceptors carved lines across Dravar hulls like surgeons making incisions to let poison drain. Dravar cannons spat needle storms that found seams and exploited them with the joy only engineers can feel and only soldiers can dread. The Saal's edge took a rail slug that kissed a reactor housing and loved it too hard. Lights died. Red flow found ribs. Corvan's chair snapped free and threw him to his knees. He stood because men like him had to be upright when the world did this. He watched 2 corvettes collide at speeds that made math weep. He watched a human ship spray folding foam across a Dravar hull to plug a wound in a nest of eggs the crew carried to keep beyond superstition. He watched a Dravar craft throw itself between a missile and a human hospital barge that had lost its escort to a software update nobody ran. He saw, in brief snapshots of madness, what 500 years had done to them. It had made them dangerous in new ways. It had taught them to love. It had taught them to save. Both skills were present in the chaos like 2 hands making a cradle and a fist at once. Elise was not supposed to be anywhere near any of this. She was in a med station clamped to the outer face of the ring, butterflied to the wreckage like a field hospital in a collapsing city. She stood in a room with one wall that was viewport and watched the lights of war the way a fisherman watches a storm march across a lake and knows which boats will not come back. She worked. Skin, blood, orders, air. Her voice went hoarse and then came back in a lower register like it had aged. She cut ship suits away. She intubated species whose throats were not human-shaped. She found time within speed to say the thing that matters. "You're safe." A pilot younger than Elise had any right to be bled out through a suit seam. He grabbed Elise's wrist with a hand he would not keep. "Doc," he whispered like he was telling her a joke, "was it worth it?" She wanted to say yes. She wanted to give him a thing to hold onto in his last fall. She realized she believed yes enough to let it be the last thing he heard. "Yes," she said, and he closed his eyes and found a door that opened. Between salvos and sutures, Elise looked out. She saw a figure walking along a truss outside the med station in a portable harness. It was Rook. It was Rook because of course it was Rook. He was patching a comm dish by hand in a field that vaporized robots. He looked up and saluted with the foolish flourish of a man who made a joke when death wanted to see if he would flinch. Elise touched the glass. He touched his helmet. The universe continued attempting to kill them. They continued attempting to embarrass it. The math turned. Enough ships died on both sides to make victory meaningless. Something very old in human command and Dravar command looked across the void and recognized itself. Corvan and Vartal spoke on a private channel. They did not trade threats, they traded breaths. "This ends like this," Corvan said hoarsely, "if we let it." "How else?" Vartal asked, sincere and tired. "Like it began," Corvan said. with two fools in a room, saying we should not die if we do not have to. Vartal closed his eyes. In that darkness he saw the obsidian temple and the water. He saw his son making a warrior's face and not yet knowing it was a mask you take off to be a father. "There is a place," he said. The place was a ruin. It had once been the citadel of Accord, a ring-shaped station where someone hung 12 banners in a gravity that made them ripple like they were underwater. 500 years ago, they signed a document there. 500 years ago, a human and a Dravar had shaken hands and the cameras had captured it and given schoolchildren a lesson about choosing not to wound. Now the citadel was a fossil orbiting a little blue star. Its docking arms were broken into a winter of twisted metal. Its lights were bones. The old table still stood. Nobody had moved it because superstition is sometimes the same as respect. Elise went because she could not go. Rook flew her there because arguments with the dead are easier than arguments with Elise. Corvan went. Vartal went. They all went with no escorts, or they went with enough secret escorts to make it feel like no escorts. The citadel creaked them into itself like an old house that had missed family. They stood where 5 centuries earlier everyone had breathed shallow. The table had scars. The room had ghosts. Vartal placed his palm on the wood where his ancestors had laid theirs. Corvan looked up at a ceiling that had once held a chandelier of planets. Elise spoke first. 500 years ago, she said quietly, the galaxy held its breath and then exhaled forgiveness. It was not perfect. It did not make saints. It made a rule. You do not shoot the people who run toward dying. Corvan's mouth twitched. "You always talk like that," he said. "Only when I'm terrified." She said, Vartal said, "My brother lived because a human said the word stay. I have never forgotten, but memory is not a policy." "Then make it one," Elise said. "Remembering is work. Policy is just remembering other people agree." They were not poets. They were tired. They were men with calendars that had tried to own them, and yet something larger sat down with them. They talked in short sentences. They said fewer absolutes than they were thinking. They made a shape out of the air that could be inhabited by people who needed less blood to get through a day. A sound cut the room like a hinge deciding to break. A rifle, a coil gun, a weapon made to reach across a void and make opinions into funerals. Elise was walking toward the table when it hit her. The impact was so intimate it felt like a kiss. She half turned because muscle memory tends to try to make everything into conversation. Then she was on the floor, her knees remembering how to be ground. She saw Rook move like a man who had been in bars at closing time and knew where to find the door and throw the right person through it. She saw Corvan's face peel back to something raw. She saw Vartal's eyes go very old. The shooter screamed something in Dravar. It meant traitor. It meant heretic. It meant you are not who I need you to be so I can stay the same. Corvan drew. He never hesitated. He would have shot. He did not get to. Vartal moved quicker because he had practice killing his own hope. He fired once. The shooter folded in a way that made the body look like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He fell as if gravity had found him after years of waiting. On the floor, Elise felt a hand on her cheek. Rook. His cybernetic lens had fogged with something like weather. He made a noise like an engine about to stall, then kept running anyway. "I'm here," he said, and it was funny and it was the most honest thing he had. Corvan leaned close. His voice was a map of all the places war had left holes. "Don't." Elise laughed a little because somebody in this room had to, and she was low to the ground, and laughter doesn't cost more when you're there. "Promise me," she whispered like a person ordering soup, like someone describing a picture. "No more silence. Speak for the living." Vartal knelt. He put his head on the floor next to hers because that was the easiest way to be at her height. "I will," he said, which was not a word he had used lightly before this day. "I will speak for the living and for the dead who have no say. I will speak to my son." Elise smiled with a corner of her mouth. It was almost the same smile she had when Gogo made a child laugh after a burn. It was a small thing in a very big room. It looked like a match. Sometimes matches are the engine, not the spark. Her eyes went steady. Then they went still. They did not place a flag over her. They placed her med kit beside her like a crown. The citadel heard a vow. It might have been in Standard. It might have been in Dravar. It was in a grammar older than both, called grief. News spread the way it always does. Wrong first, then frantic, then curated, then useful. Some said the Dravar killed her. Some said a human operative did, eager for martyrdom. Some said the gun fired itself because history is a machine that loves endings. The truth settled into the cracks over time. A Dravar fanatic born in a slum on a ring moon, taught to believe the Accord had stolen something from him he had never owned, smuggled onto the citadel by a chain of greed that wore 3 flags. Vartal shot him. It had not changed what had already been done. It changed what could still be done. The war did not end that day. That is not how honest stories work. Raids scabbed over and peeled back. The silent guard split. Half disarmed, disillusioned, sent their ships to be repainted. The other half drifted to the outer dark, where ideologies freeze into statues that think they are alive. A Dravar armored brigade refused orders and barricaded itself in a fuel depot until their mothers came and told them to come home. People who had not said sorry in decades found the word tasted like water and kept drinking. Corvin and Vartal met again, not to sign, not to pose, but to work. They wrote something that did not have pretty phrases about eternal amities. It had line items. It had funding mechanisms. It had enforcement teeth that bit people like them. It put medics not under the rule of any military, but under a joint council of beings who had bled together. It created a registry of ships that did not carry weapons but were escorted by fleets made of enemies taking turns. It housed the registry on a platform called Elise Station, an ugly name, some said, too obvious, too sentimental, but people said it smiling. The platform hung in orbit above Vraxis Prime. A monument stood in its dark park. It was not a statue of Elise. It was 2 hands, a human hand and a Dravar claw, not clasped like lovers, not balled like fists, but touching palm to palm, as if demonstrating how skin knows what to do when it meets other skin. Beneath the hands, an inscription to the one who held the rule when we wanted to drop it, to the ones who hold it now. Rook came and looked up at the hands. He had shaved. He had not stopped drinking. He pressed his palm to the base of the statue and felt the sun warm in the metal that made the thing feel like it had a pulse. "Here's your payment," he said softly, soup simmering. He had a bowl in a paper carton. He set it at the base because grief makes shrines out of very normal habits. A girl with a gap in her teeth tugged his sleeve. "Mister?" "Yeah," he said, rough. "What does it mean?" she asked, pointing up. "That we're trying again," he said, "and we'll have to keep trying." "Every day?" she asked, because children understand work better than adults, they just want to know the schedule. "Every day," he said, on a transport headed to a station where peace tasted like paperwork. A Dravar youth sat next to a human youth, and neither of them made eye contact until one of them pulled a puppet from a pocket. 7 legs, button eyes. Ridiculous. They both laughed because some tools are molecules of memory. Years later, a child asked her mother in a garden under an artificial sky, "Why do they call it the War of Silent Stars?" Her mother planted something green in a square of dirt made from asteroids. She brushed soil from her knuckles. She looked up at a sky full of lights and thought of the noise those lights could make. Because once the galaxy stopped talking and started breaking, she said, because we tried to be quiet after we had been loud for too long and the silence grew mold. Because a human medic chose to speak with her hands and her blood and others listened. Because silence is easy. Speaking is work. Do the stars still go silent? The child asked, worried by the phrase, trying to figure out if stars could be asked to behave. Sometimes, the mother said, but not for long, because we know better now. Admiral Corvin retired to a small house near a sea that used to be a quarry. He walked the beach. He taught nephews to swear in languages he did not admit to knowing. He wrote letters to a Dravar boy who had become a man, and then a commander, and then something else. He did not put his medals in a drawer. He hung them in a hallway where water had once stained the paint, because he wanted visitors to ask and get the short version. Commander Vartal became an elder, which among the Dravar meant you were given a chair and a bowl, and the job of telling stories in a way that made people feel both braver and more ashamed. His son brought him tea that smelled of copper and honey. Vartal taught him the word humans used for stay. The boy said it badly. Vartal loved it better for the imperfection. Rook disappeared as men like Rook do into lanes where law goes thin. His name turned up in a dispatch from a pirate lord who had no idea he had ever been saved by a medic on Ceres. His ship, patched, beloved, Sirius, was seen hovering over a colony hit by a quake, dropping crates that had medical symbols on them as if that made him legitimate. It did. Elise is not in any of these stories because the good thing she did left no room for more doing. But she is in all of them because sometimes the act is the echo, and the echo is the architecture you live inside and call civilization. She is the bracelet on the wrist of a Dravar paramedic who learned to tie one-handed knots because a Terran taught him in a tent where the air smelled like burned plastic and hope. She is the holiday where children get free checkups, and the puppet shows are mandatory, and the adults cry in a way that makes the children ask questions that have better answers now. At a conference where everyone wore lanyards and less dignity than the event required, a young diplomat asked Corvan, what stopped the war in the end? The treaty, the threat of mutual assured destruction, the shared economy, the stars. Corvan said, a woman refusing to let us make the wrong meaning out of grief. He drained the terrible coffee and said, and two stubborn men too proud to admit they were tired of fighting until someone bled on their shoes. The war of silent stars is taught now in schools the way myths are taught when the adults are trying to remind themselves what they used to be able to do. The first lesson is not about the battle. It is about a ship with an open hand painted on it. In a museum in the quiet district of Terra's capital, there is a wall where people put their palms. The wall is smooth, warm. Sensors in the metal whisper to servers. The servers count palms. The plaque says, if you have used your hands this year to help, add your print. If you have used your hands this year to hurt, add your print. If you are not sure which you have done more, add your print. We will count them honestly and let that be the scoreboard we use. Some years the count is better. Some years it is worse. Nobody stops counting. On a deep space station that used to be a ruin and is now a classroom, a Dravar elder tells a story to an audience of little creatures whose ears are all shaped different. He says, once we forgot how to speak. Then a human brought us a grammar. He says, we do not conquer. He says we endure, and that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY sci-fi tales. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.